Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. You know, here with me today, Jack McCann with McCann & Hubbard. Jack does both. He's a real estate attorney as well as estate planning. And one of the areas we get into when we're talking about estate planning and planning in general, as I said, that old adage about failing to plan is planning to fail. Now, there's a reason for that. So when we talk about making a decision and a tendency to procrastinate sometimes when it comes to estate planning, and many times, in fact, is the fact that we've basically made a decision. No decision is a decision, right? If you don't make a choice, that's a choice, because you're leaving it for someone, either for someone else to decide or for certain, as we mentioned with intestate laws, for it to be decided that way. What if you have a company, you know, a family business as an example, and you're trying to figure out how to deal with, who's going to be in charge or how that's going to be dealt with, or is a family going to stay in charge, or you want it sold in the family benefit, and who's going to do the buying, all the different things. There's so many different choices to be made that sometimes we can get that, what's that, paralysis by analysis. We tend to get so into trying to figure it out and it needing to be perfect that we don't do anything, right? We can't act at all. And any plan is better than no plan, right? And this comes into, if you're faced with this decision, and Jack, you've run into these kind of situations, when you run into that decision, walking through, okay, if you don't have a plan, as we were just talking about with intestate laws as an example, but with a family business even more so, you're basically leaving it for your beneficiaries to have to end up in court, most likely, to figure it out. And the expense of that and the potential conflicts that could arise from that could be avoided had you just, if nothing else, say, hey, let's put together what's the next best thing. If I can't have the perfect plan, what's the next best thing I can do? If I can't do the right thing, what's the next best thing I can do? All right, in this situation, and let's at least do that.
Yeah, I agree. We run into that, and we were talking about the cost earlier of intestate probate, and if somebody's having to deal with the cost of maintaining a house. Well, a business is even worse, because not only do you have the cost of maintaining that business, but you're losing money because there's no clear person in charge. We have to go to the court to get authority to be in charge, and it runs into all kinds of problems depending upon what kind of business you have. If it requires a certain licensed person to be in charge, well, if there's nobody designated, then we can run into regulatory issues with the state or the federal government. And so I've run into that several times where somebody's built a business up, and in their mind they're thinking, oh, I've got to pick the child who loves this business as much as I do, and that's the one who's got to run it. And they keep waiting and waiting and waiting to figure out which one of their kids loves their business as much as they do. Well, in the meantime, they don't have a plan in place, and if something happens to them, car wreck, heart attack, stroke, there's no plan in place. It's better to have a plan that's not perfect than no plan at all. If you at least got somebody designated, even if they're not going to run the company as good as you do, if you've got somebody that everybody can turn around and look at and say, well, they're in charge, or even better, if you've got two kids and you can't decide which one's going to be better, let's make them both be in charge. They can be co-managers. There's nothing wrong with that, and then they can figure out what their particular niches are and delegate powers to one another. Yeah. But at least if you've left that plan behind where the two of them are in charge together, then everybody knows who to look at. The state's happy because they've got somebody designated that can be, you know, the person for decision making or for licensing, and the clients of your business are going to be much happier because they're going to say, well, he did have a plan in place. We can still trust this company. We can still keep working with this company, versus he didn't have any kind of plan in place. Who have we been dealing with? We need to go to the competitor. That's the last thing you want, because the business that you've built up can very quickly fall to being worthless if you don't have a plan in place for that business. Yeah,
the succession plan for any business is very, very important. I mean, even in my business, it's the same concept. What happens if I never, as I said, I'm having a great time. I love what I do. I don't ever intend to retire, not in the sense that we think of go away from this. What I have in mind is just continue to do it as long as I can. Some of the people that I admire the most, in fact, people like a Warren Buffett or a Charlie Munger or Jack Bogle before he passed. These are all people, and others like Carl Icahn. These are all people that are in their 80s and heck, Munger in his 90s and still work every day. Why? Because they love what they do and they enjoy it, and it keeps them, they're mentally stimulated, and you feel like you're contributing. I mean, there's just so many different rewards that come from that. Now, do they also enjoy their free time and their playtime and go out and do that too? Of course they do, and maybe that's a share. Maybe that division of labor, if you will, how much they do one versus the other changes a little bit. But that's the beauty of good estate planning, is getting this all in line for yourself and what you want to do. And this was where having a succession plan, though, because as much as I may want to go for as long as I can go and intend to, I mean, nobody's promised tomorrow, right? We never know what could happen, the different things that can take us out. So this is where having a succession plan that protects my clients and protects the planning that we've set in place to make sure there's a continuity to it as well is so important. And so I have a backup plan for that. And this is one of those areas when it comes to your planning, is doing the same thing. So if you're a business owner, or if you've, this succession planning, we can't stress enough. And again, it's not necessarily the perfect thing. If you can't have that perfect thing, the child that's following you in business, and maybe a number of children, or maybe it's, whatever it is for you, do the planning. And if nothing else, I've seen a lot of times where you have partnerships as a part of a succession plan, putting more than one entity together sometimes is the best plan. So, all right, planning, and then now we talked about businesses, but again, on the individual level, it's the same thing. Don't procrastinate. Don't, keep putting it off. Get it handled. Have the peace of mind in knowing it's done, and then your family is going to be taken care of as well in a way, in the manner that you want. If you've got family situations where you're not sure about, who's the most responsible, or, who to put in charge, maybe sometimes putting a joint situation there, putting them jointly in charge might be the way to go. But whatever it is, sit down and go through the steps of finding out what the best options are for today. All right? And knowing that it's not etched in stone. It can easily be changed. It's just paper. Okay, it's going to do what you need it to do, but if it's a year from now, a month from now, a week from now, or 10 years from now, you can go back and you can adjust and amend that document to have it, if that if your life changes, or if your family dynamic changes in some way, or whatever it is that you've set up, all of a sudden you want to do it differently, easy to do. It's easy to make those changes, but better to have a plan than no plan. When it comes to estate plan, we've been talking about the 5 essential documents, the value of will, of a trust over will in many situations. Any plan is better than none, as we just said. The other part that comes into it, the types of trust. And one of those areas that we haven't talked a lot about on the show is special needs trust. Maybe you have a special needs child, or this goes to, even if you, within a good estate plan, this trust document, a lot of times there'll be language in there that'll state, even if you don't have that dynamic right now, it will say, if one of my children, or if one of the beneficiaries does become incapacitated, does become a special needs individual, then we've got language in there for that as well. And this is a whole another area of planning, Jack, and you deal with this as well. When it comes to special needs trust, now usually this is going to be for adult children, correct, with special needs.
Well, children who are going to become adults, yeah, we do run into that. Earlier in the show, we were talking about conservatorships, where we're going to court to be petitioned to be in charge of an adult who's incapacitated. Well, if you have a child who is born with maybe Down syndrome or something like that, or maybe was in an accident themselves as a teenager and becomes incapacitated, and we know, or and the doctors know, that they're never fully going to be able to manage their own affairs, well, we can go ahead and create a special needs trust under your estate plan, which would put, instead of just putting assets in their name, it puts the assets into a special trust that provides for their benefit. But the word special comes about because it's designed to not interfere with or disqualify them from other benefits that they may receive, either from the government or from some award that they receive through a judgment. And so it's a carefully crafted plan looking at the long-term needs of that child, regardless of what their age is right now. We're looking at the rest of their life. And so the Special Needs Trust is created under your estate plan to help take care of them, and maybe at some point in the future we would still end up needing to be a conservatorship, but at least we would have a funding vehicle in place that's not under the court's direction. It's under the direction, the way you set it up with the people that you felt like would manage that money or those assets in a good way for that person. And we can set up a team. You can have somebody who is in charge of the person and taking care of them, and a different person or financial advisor who's in charge of managing that money for the benefit of that child.
And having the money, so you're making sure you've got a vehicle to hold funds for that special needs child during their lifetime. And sometimes you might even, depending on the size of your estate or just the whole dynamics of other beneficiaries and things that you're doing, we'll talk about this in a moment, about maybe how life insurance could be of value to you in that same scenario.
Yeah.
But first we're going to take a break. All right, so join us here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.